fatty acids, really important. What are they? Nothing more than a hydroxyl group followed by a string of different carbons, okay? And again, usually the carbons are going to have single bonds if they're saturated fats, because the carbons are essentially saturated. They only have 4 spots to bind to different molecules. And if it's saturated, right, all 4 spots are full. That's called a saturated fatty acid. If we put a double bond in between those carbons at any point, that makes the fat either, monounsaturated if there's only one double bond, or polyunsaturated, which just means many double bonds. We'll kind of look at the science here in a second. Just put up a couple of visuals so you guys can see what I'm talking about here. Okay, first off, here's your saturated fatty acid, right? See the carbon right here? So we have this carbon, this hydroxyl group. We have carbon, bond to carbon, bond to carbon, bond to carbon. You can see single bonds all in between. These carbons are saturated, hence saturated fatty acids. So saturated fatty acids get the name from the actual chemical structure. Now, as soon as we start to add one double bond, now that's considered a monounsaturated fatty acid. So now instead of it being saturated, it's mono, meaning one, and now it's unsaturated. So now the carbons start to lack their full 4 bonds across the board, with the exception being like the outer tip here at the start. Hope that makes sense out of the gates. And so when you look at saturated fatty acids, the little white dots here, these are just all carbons. The blues are the hydrogens. That's how it looks, except, with the exception being the end. And then you can see when you start to add an unsaturated fatty acid, you throw a double bond there. And then again, where that double bond is will tell you if it's an omega-6 or an omega-3. All right. So if it's on that 3rd carbon, it would be an omega-3. If it's on the 6th carbon, it's an omega-6. All right. Now, why does that matter? So if you look at these group here, you have this methyl end here, right? Methyl is a CH3. So the white's a carbon, 1, 2, 3. So it happens right between the 3rd and the 4th. That makes it an omega-3 fatty acid. And when you look here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this makes it an omega-6 fatty acid. So this is kind of how the fats are how we know what they are, what the structure is. If not, we just kind of know it as, usually omega-3 good, omega-6 bad. Well, this kind of gives you a little bit more insight. Now, let's go look at metabolic pathway. So omega-6, right? Why is an omega-6 fatty acid kind of unique? Well, omega-6 fatty acids, the farther down the chain and the more double bonds we have, the more fragile those fats are. And so that can be problematic. And so your polyunsaturated fatty acids like fish oil can be good, especially when they come from fish. But when we start to take a lot of the plant fats, whether it's safflower, canola, peanut, right? The more processing that is involved in extracting these fatty acids, guess what happens? The more the fats get damaged. So that's really important to think about. So you have things like olive oil, avocado oil, especially if they're cold pressed, maybe a little bit easier to extract, right? So those are on the unsaturated fatty acid side. Then you have your polyunsaturated fatty acids. This could be your canola. This could be your safflower, right? And again, the processing there tends to be more extreme, more heat. So these fats tend to be more oxidized. And the omega-6 content in these fatty acids tend to be higher.